Welcome back to the Wading Through the Waters podcast. My name is Josh, and I'm here with Kathryn. Kathryn, how are you today?
I'm doing well. How
Good,
are you?
good. I'm so glad that you have said yes to this and that we can sit down and just talk a little bit. I know
Yeah.
the whole goal is sometimes we're in lunch and we just have great conversations about
Yeah.
things that are happening, things that we're thinking about, and I've always wanted to just record that, and and
Yeah.
and so excited to have you. This podcast is designed to help people wade through the waters of life and navigate a difficult mental health system. And so that's our goal. That's what we're trying to do, is help people navigate life. And so we have some questions we're going to talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about you, a little bit about your areas of interest and things that you like to learn about in counseling.
Yeah.
And so first, I'd love to talk a little bit about your background and learn a little bit about who Kathryn is and
Sure.
how you got here as
Yeah.
a provider. And so, first of all, when did you know that you wanted to be a counselor?
That's a tough question to answer. So I
Okay.
guess I would say my interest in psychology started probably in high school,
Okay.
actually. But I wasn't sure I wanted to go to grad school, and so I knew that the options were limited if you didn't. So I went a completely different route at first, and then I think working in social services, I was really fortunate coming out of college to work for an agency that really valued trauma-informed care.
Okay.
And so I remember kind of like sitting in a training. I had been working with a lot of social workers and things like that at that point, and I was sitting in a training about that, and kind of, I don't know, it clicked, and I was like, I need to
Yeah.
go back to grad school and do this.
Okay. And then you went
Yeah.
back to grad school. Now, that's a 2-year process for.
For me, it was a 3-year because I was working.
Yeah.
I had a baby through the process, so I did a kind of 3-year part-time program.
Okay,
So
cool.
yeah, quite
And
the
then
journey.
and
Yeah.
then where did your career go from there? You came straight
Yeah.
out of grad school, or what did you do?
Yeah, so like I said, before grad school, I was kind of already working in the space, but I was more working on the side of kind of community organizing and communications, and just trying to connect actually military families to resources, mental health being one of them. And then after I went back to grad school, my focus was actually with survivors of interpersonal violence.
Wow.
Yeah, and so I did that for a little bit, and then started here at Peaceful Waters.
Okay. Yeah. So now you've gone through and dealt with a lot of different traumas, people who
Yeah.
who are dealing with a lot of different things.
Yeah.
Did anything at first catch your interest in terms of that? I know you said you dealt with interpersonal trauma.
Yeah, interpersonal violence, and then even before I was a counselor, like doing the work that I did in a different role with social services was focused on military families and
Right.
veterans. So there's obviously a lot of trauma, PTSD, or just life challenges that come up with that.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was definitely where my focus was to start, and still where my probably primary interest lies
Okay.
is still working with folks that are navigating that.
Yeah. Now, so you don't have I know some counselors go into a specific specialty where
Yeah.
they love to just dive into all the research and all the different aspects of one certain part of counseling. And
Yeah.
I think the Swiss Army knife that is having multiple aspects that you
Yeah.
focus on is a great benefit. And I know that's something that I think you have.
Yeah.
What do you enjoy the most about counseling and looking into, and what's been the thing you've enjoyed most focusing on?
Yeah, so again, that trauma PTSD is a big focus of mine. I like nerd out on the neuroscience of kind of like the brain, and really like to like dig into what's happening and what happens when we encounter stress and anxiety and things like that.
Where did you think that came from? Like, did you
yeah.
have personal experience with something like that? Or
Absolutely, yeah. So growing up, I grew up in a home with domestic violence. So
Okay.
it is really near and dear to my heart, kind
Yeah.
of going through that and kind of going through my own process of healing from that,
Yeah.
definitely was where that interest lied. And I think for me, education about it and like understanding what was going on, in my brain and
Yeah.
other people's brain in response to that was a big part of my own healing. So
Right.
I just like that education piece of it and just kind of the understanding of what's happening. Because I think when we can understand, we can understand ourselves better, but I also
Mm.
think it takes away a lot of the, I don't know, shame or
Mm.
just kind of mystery out of like what's happening.
And it
Yeah,
empowers you to be able to
absolutely.
move forward from it.
Yes.
When
Yep.
you can call it out and say, "Hey,
Yeah.
this is the reason behind,
Mhm.
why I do some of the things I do."
Yep.
It really does empower you, and that's what I think
Absolutely.
is great about
Yeah.
the work that's done here, but
Yep.
also just obviously,
Yeah.
especially now, I think there's been I wouldn't say a revitalization, but an awakening in this generation
Mhm.
to
Yeah.
really learn about some of these things. Much
Absolutely.
more than
Yeah.
the conversations that were had just 20 years ago,
Sure.
like I think even 10 years ago, like
Yeah.
especially the pandemic,
Yep.
where we had
It's
so
like
many
this
different,
collective stress.
oh my
Yeah. This
gosh.
collective trauma, if you will. Yeah.
What
Yeah.
did you guys find? I know that
Mm-mm.
obviously we went to working virtually for a long
Sure.
time.
Yeah.
What did
Yeah.
you guys find people were dealing with
Yeah.
in the pandemic?
It's odd. I feel like for some people it was, really difficult and
Yeah.
really challenging. And of course, I think the panic, that collective panic and anxiety was a big part of like just helping people navigate at first and
Right. That crisis mode type of
yeah,
feeling.
that crisis mode. And then I think as it continued, I think we found like one of two things where I had some clients who were really, and just, friends and family members who were really like finding themselves thriving, in the midst of it and
Okay.
finding like they could catch a breath, like
Uh-huh.
whether that was because they were able to work from home and have a little bit more balance, or recognizing like certain relationships were, unhealthy, or the pressures of just life,
Yeah.
that all the things were kind of taken off the table. And they were able to be a little bit more present. And then I think other people had the exact opposite
Yeah.
experience, where like the isolation and just the, the stress of maybe living in a community where they were being hit a lot harder
Mm.
by the pandemic.
Yeah.
It was a lot more loss and more, depression and things like that.
Oh gosh. I mean,
So
I know that all too well
mhm.
with,
Yeah.
we had a baby in the pandemic. I
Yeah.
just think about all the
Yeah.
life experiences that
Yep.
people had
Sure.
graduating high school and
Yeah, that they missed
college.
out on.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's
Mm-hmm.
so much to grieve and
Yes. Yeah.
to process.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
do you have any takeaways from
Mm.
maybe things that you learned or that you tried to help clients learn,
Sure.
now that we're kind of on the other
On the
side of
other
it? We're
end
still
of
dealing
it.
with the effects, but were there
Yeah.
any takeaways that you found that were helpful, or
Mm-hmm.
anything that you
Yeah.
thought?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think just like one, this is just good in general, but like being present, with yourself. I
Hmm.
think that the pandemic maybe forced a lot of people to have to do that in a really different way than they ever had been. And
Mm.
so, I think learning to kind of listen in and tune in to what's going on for you,
Right.
and kind of having that minute of quiet that we don't really get very often.
Yeah.
And then I think, um, yeah, just maybe learning to just better ways of like coping with uncertainty.
Mm.
I think that that's a really big part of, what a lot of us aren't comfortable with, and where we have to really get a little bit more comfortable with that uncertainty and
Right.
just how to navigate that and tolerate it.
Yeah, there's so
Yeah.
much of when you're in the swing of things, you're in this cycle of just
Right.
going to work and doing this and doing
Mm-hmm.
this, and then when everything comes to a halt, you have no idea what to
Yeah.
do,
Absolutely. Yeah.
and it's kind of like the prevention method of, you don't go to a doctor only when you're sick.
Right.
You have to go for regular checkups.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
if you do that with yourself emotionally and mentally,
Yeah.
you're able to much better handle the things that can come in your life, I'm sure.
Yes.
Um,
Big time. Mm-hmm.
so want to talk, and this can be pandemic related or not so much as much. I want to talk about some of the challenges that you
Sure.
have. Just kind of dive into um, what it means to be a counselor, and how the work you are doing can be difficult at times. And
Yeah.
so I'm wondering, what are some of the challenges that you have in trying to help clients?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. I think some of it is, you mentioned like this podcast was designed to help navigate the mental health system. I think that that system is probably one of the biggest challenges
Okay.
sometimes that comes up, right? Whether it's like access to a higher level of care or just, maybe a different, another type of resource that is there. And I think, especially with us being in a more rural community, I think that that's even
Huh.
more of a challenge sometimes, is like having the necessary resources that we need, to really meet the needs of clients sometimes
Yeah.
can
And
be really difficult.
in
Yeah.
what way do you
Mm-mm.
think um, different communities have struggles? Because
Sure.
I
Yeah.
think
Mm-hmm.
it can sound ambiguous to some people, like, mental health
Mm-hmm.
is just um, is not as important, or
Right. Right.
so in what ways do you think there are challenges for communities like ours? Because I want
Yeah.
to get really
Yeah.
specific
Sure.
to some of the people
Absolutely.
who could be listening and say,
Yeah.
um, this isn't easy sometimes. So what would you say
Mm-hmm.
to the challenges that are here specifically that you've seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think even though, like you said, it's getting a lot better, I think even culturally, sometimes like that recognition that, um, it's okay to go see a counselor. So
Yeah.
I think that can be like the first hurdle,
Mm-hmm.
especially, when maybe you're raised with more values like, pull your stuff up, yourself up by your bootstraps
Uh-huh.
or things like that. So I think that that can be one hurdle. And then I think, when the next hurdle is just
Mm.
finding care,
Mm.
right? And like even knowing where to look,
Yeah.
right? I really learned this in kind of my role before becoming a counselor, was like sometimes people just don't even know where to look or what to search for, or you know and then they start looking, and then there's all these different names and all
Mm-hmm.
different styles of therapy, and like finding the right fit is a big part of it. And so you start looking at that and it becomes really daunting, and
Yeah.
then calling and being told that there's a waiting list, right? And so I think especially around in this area, there's just not enough
Mm.
people to meet the demand, right?
Yeah.
That's out there,
And
and so
I think the way I
it's
kind of look at
hard.
it is like the barrier to entry,
Yes,
the all of the
yeah.
steps that can
Yep.
come in for somebody to actually
Right.
start that process,
Right.
and actually get into it too.
Yep.
A lot of people
Mhm.
may take that first step, but sometimes that first session they just don't come back, or
Sure. Yeah.
and so along that lines, one of the questions I had was about what you do to build rapport and
Mhm.
build trust.
Yeah.
I know that word
Yeah.
is not typically used, rapport,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
trust with your clients, and you want to
That's
build a
really what it is,
relationship.
though. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Mhm.
what do you find has been the most helpful to do that,
Mhm.
and what do you feel is most important in that first process of building trust?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that can go into it. Obviously just kind of like giving that space to listen and really, um, tune into what they need, and that might look really different with different clients,
Right.
right? Some clients come in and they're ready to talk, and so it's just kind of giving that space. For other clients, they might need a little bit more on the front end from you to feel comfortable, whether that's just information about counseling and
Mm-hmm.
how it works and the process, so that they're really kind of, it's not as much of a mystery anymore, and they kind of know what to expect, so
Yeah.
that they can sort of ease, or just even being a human,
Yeah.
right? I am not a like just smile and nod type of
Yeah.
therapist. And so, my personality is going to come out. And I think that, just being a human and, yeah, getting up and not being rigid and giving them permission to kind of like do what they need to do. I know that those things kind of sound silly, but I think a lot of times people come in, and especially if it's their first time,
Mm-hmm.
it's a scary, it's daunting. So I
Yeah.
think having someone just say like, get comfortable, like take your shoes off if you
Yeah.
want to,
Yeah. Yeah.
I think can really like put people at ease,
Yeah.
right from the very beginning. Yeah.
And then, what would you say to somebody who's skeptical, who's kind of heard about counseling and knows that it's important,
Yeah.
and they've just not taken that step? I'm curious.
Sure.
Do you have any thoughts for that person?
Yeah.
What do you feel like is most important that they know about counseling and they know about the process of just starting? What do you think is most important for them?
Yeah. I mean, I would say be skeptical. Like, I think that's okay, especially if it leans on the side of curiosity.
Good. Yeah.
Because, and ask lots of questions.
Yeah.
I think that's it's a big misconception, about therapy is like, okay, especially after you've jumped through all these hurdles to get in with to someone. But like, even before that, just asking questions of the person, asking what their style is, asking, about the process, asking what methods that they use and why that might work for your specific, issue that you're bringing in or whatever's causing you to seek therapy. We know from research that like one of the strongest predictors of whether therapy is going to work or not is that relationship, that rapport that you're talking about.
Right.
So, that's one of the strongest predictors of success in therapy. So it's okay to shop around,
Yeah, I was just gonna
and
say
find
that.
the right fit. And I tell every client that from the start. I said, if it's all about finding the right fit, it's okay if I'm not that for you. I'd rather you voice that so I can maybe help you find the right person. We have a lot of good therapists here, and we all have different styles. So
Yeah, and to embrace that initial
Yeah,
process,
absolutely.
because I think oftentimes it's just like, no, it didn't work, I'm good.
Right.
And it's
Yep.
like, if you commit to it and say, look, like I'm going to find somebody who I can connect with,
Right.
right. You will. It may
Sure.
take, so for some people it's that first time, so
Yep.
for some people may have issues that it doesn't even matter. They just need to talk to somebody.
Yeah,
Somebody, it doesn't
absolutely.
matter who it is.
Right,
But for some
right.
people, they really need to have that connection, and it may take
Yep.
a couple of people
Yes.
to really have a good connection and to really understand the style and
Sure.
because like you said, you're human. You have different ways of connecting with people. You have friends that you connect with,
Right.
for a reason, because you guys are alike. And so
yeah.
now I want to ask you about your job more and talk about what you really enjoy about being a provider here. You can talk specifically about Peaceful Waters, but also just what do you enjoy about counseling people?
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm a naturally curious person, and so I really enjoy just like being curious with my clients. I tell them I don't have all the answers. Yes, I have expertise. Yes, I have training, but I really enjoy just kind of going through that journey with them and witnessing a lot of courage and vulnerability, and it really takes that. And then especially when you have those light bulb moments, when clients have those light bulb moments, that is the really cool part of the work that we do.
Yeah.
And it just, I guess I just am inspired all the time, and am, learning all the time. And I really like that part of it.
Yeah.
And I feel like, going to the Peaceful Waters, this environment in particular really does that, right? I think we all work really well together. And I think, there's just a good sense of community here, and a good sense of like we're taking care of our clients, but that we also take care of each other, and you just don't get that everywhere.
So let's talk a little bit about your journey here at Peaceful Waters and when you initially came, and who you started working with. So I know you had experience with trauma and understanding that and helping people walk through really difficult situations that they were in, or things that have been done to them. First of all, what are some of those situations? I know we say trauma, right? But what are some of the experiences that people have gone through that you tried to help them through?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I feel like that's become, you talk about social media, definitely a buzzword, and it is, like what what is that? And it can be a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So where I was at before, specifically working with interpersonal violence, that would be, domestic violence,
Okay.
sexual assault, you know, yeah, child abuse, things like that.
Mm.
So specifically like person on person violence,
Okay.
stalking, harassment, things like that.
Wow.
So yeah, that was very specialized. So I was really, I mean, that was the only people that we worked with was, people that had gone through something like that.
Okay.
Coming and journeying to peaceful waters, like then yeah, that definition of trauma for sure expanded. That could be, um, first responders and some of the stuff that they see on their calls, but it can also be, you know, I don't want to say smaller because it's not. I don't think we want to get into the business of like comparing,
Sure.
right? But just anything that can cause that like stress, fight or flight response. And I think a lot of times we overlook things like, an embarrassing moment in school where someone's, making fun of you or bullying. And those things can be, just as traumatic, especially when they happen multiple times, repeatedly. They can have, the same types of effects.
Yeah.
So yeah, and what might be trauma to one person might not be for another person.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And then I know military as well.
Yeah,
There's a lot
absolutely.
of people obviously who have trauma from the
Yep.
military. You're
Yep.
you're a military spouse, and
yeah.
so
Yep.
that's something you're familiar with personally as your spouse. But I'm sure that you had to help so many of the people in the military with the stress, the anxiety that can come with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so you started by coming here, and you were working a lot in those scenarios, right?
Yeah.
And then I know you didn't stay with just that, right?
Yeah,
So what happened?
No. Well, yeah, coming here, and I think that while yes, we have providers that specialize, like we are more general population. Like, people are coming here for a lot of different things, right? So we're not just known as like, a trauma focused agency, although we do have a lot of us do have training specifically in that. But so yeah, I actually fell in. I had not, really worked with kids all that much, and so fell into working with kids, and it was just kind of, I think, the ongoing joke here of just like, wow, Kathryn really builds good, rapport and works really well with kids, and I think it was initially a growth edge for me, and I had to kind of seek out some more training and things like that. But I really find I like working with the kiddos, especially teenagers as well.
What do you think made you start to like it? Because I'm sure it's scary at first because it's
very different.
I think it's very like you said, you probably had to learn some more stuff about how to interact
absolutely
in that relationship. So what made you start to like it and start to understand that, oh, I think I'm pretty good at this, like what was that journey like?
Yeah. I mean, I think, you're right. It was just learning different ways of connecting, different ways of like, doing the work, right? Because it is very different. They're at a completely different developmental stage, and that can look way different for, a 7-year-old versus a 14-year-old.
Right.
But I think what I really liked it was like kids, or even adolescents are sponges, right? Like they're not, their brains are able to make these connections so much faster sometimes than adult brains are. And so it was just really neat to see, how like play therapy techniques and just, teaching skills, how, we talk about something, they'd go home and like implement it right away. Right. And come back and just be so happy and, it worked. And so that was really cool for me to see.
Yeah.
And it's just a different pace working with kids.
I was going to say, I feel like there's a lot more openness, but then I'm also second guessing myself. What is the experience like?
I feel it's just different. Yeah. I mean, I think that can be the same as adults. Like, so some kids are really open and just like talking and chatterboxes. For other kids, they might be a little bit more anxious, and you really have to kind of work. I think the cool thing about kids and especially teenagers, right, is like, they don't play. They can read you like a book. If they don't like what's going on, they don't like, you will know. And I think that can be really cool because then you can, it's more there right in your face, right? You can work with that. And I think that can allow for, healing and change to occur a lot faster.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And what do you do in those scenarios? I mean,
yeah.
if you can tell that, I mean, let's talk about kids or teenagers, for
Yeah.
example.
Mm-hmm.
If you can tell that they're not into it,
Yeah.
maybe their parent brought them in.
Yep.
They're just like,
Which
you need to go to
happens a
counseling.
lot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
You need to go
Mm-hmm.
into counseling for, a divorce or
Right.
a thing that was traumatic to you. Like, and you
Right.
can tell that they're just not into it. What do you do? Like,
Honestly, especially if it's a teenager, I will just say that. I'll just be
yeah,
like, it's okay. You don't want to be here. You know,
yeah.
that's okay. You know, what do you want to talk about? And I might spend, a few sessions just like kind of giving them back a little bit of control. Because
Hmm.
especially if they're kind of being forced into coming, a lot of that control is taken from them. And so I think it's important for me to put it back in their hands a little bit, knowing that like that front end work will hopefully lead to kind of trust and rapport, and
Mm.
they'll eventually get to what they need to, talk about.
Yeah, and
Um,
not putting a timeline on it,
yeah,
you know,
exactly. Yep.
trying
Yep.
to trying to let, yeah, like you said, give them some
Right.
control,
Right.
because
Yeah.
that's the only way. And
Mm-hmm.
not saying that the parent is wrong to bring them in
No,
and
no, no,
force
no,
them. It's
not at
more just
all.
to
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
you have to build trust, and you have to build this
Yes.
relationship,
Yeah.
for any meaningful conversation and change to happen. And so
Right.
it just sometimes takes time
Mm-hmm.
and a really careful evaluation of where you should go next.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And parents are definitely well meaning. It's just, it's a challenge. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What do you say to the parents that are going through
Mm-mm.
that?
Yeah. I think just letting them know of that, what you're saying about time, and just that it's going to take some time, especially if they're, you know, not coming of their own decision,
Right.
right? And not the ones doing, really wanting to be there initially. It's going to take some time. And that I think change happens overnight. And that I really feel parents are a huge part of that process. So,
Mm.
I want them to be involved in it
Mm.
as
Yeah,
well.
because I think there's a generational, like we were talking about, there's a
Yep.
generational difference in the way people see
Yeah.
therapy,
Yeah.
counseling, and so the parents sometimes can see counseling different than their
Yes.
child,
Yes.
and
Mm-hmm.
I think it's our jobs to I think it's our job to understand how to help people overcome
Right.
those differences.
Absolutely. Yep.
As a place where people can come and
Mm-hmm.
talk about some of the deepest things in their life.
Mm-hmm.
You have obstacles that you have to overcome, and I think
Absolutely.
it's really can be difficult sometimes, but also, like you were talking about, rewarding
Yes.
to
Yeah.
understand and really work through some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
I want to talk about some of the common misconceptions of
Sure.
therapy,
Yeah.
because like we talked about stigma
Mm-hmm.
and the cultural differences. So what are some of the most common misconceptions that you
Mm-hmm.
have found prevalent today?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that one, like coming to therapy, like makes you weak or yeah, whatever the case. So I think that I do see that one changing a lot,
Okay.
right? I don't think that comes up as often, but it's still there, right? And, I always say like that therapy is, oof, you're putting yourself out there,
Hmm.
like really being vulnerable, really doing tough work.
Yeah.
It takes a lot of courage. Yeah. I think the other one is the time thing that you were talking about, like just that. I think a lot of people come in thinking like maybe it can be fixed in a few sessions, and sometimes that's the case.
Hmm.
But I think a lot of times, it's not, right. A lot of times the first few sessions is us really just identifying the problem or
Uh-huh.
what's going on or what's contributing to it, and kind of setting some goals. So
Why do you think
yeah.
it can't? I
Yeah.
wanna just go
Yeah.
down that a little
Sure.
bit. Why do you
Yeah.
think it can't be fixed in one or two sessions? Because
Right.
some people really, I think, believe that.
Sure.
I
Yeah.
go to a doctor, they give me some
Right.
medicine
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
that. So why
Yeah.
do you think it can't for somebody who's gone through something um, pretty deep and they may not know it?
Right.
What do you think
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
there?
Yeah. Yeah. And like I said, I think very occasionally it can be, but I think it can't because, again, the first few times are really us just trying to figure out like what is, um, what's going on here, right? I think if someone's shown up at my door, the chances that they've tried to do it, on their own, right? And have run into an obstacle somehow, which means that, there's a lot to this, right? And that we really want to give it some time to figure it out, to look at it, to kind of dive in. And especially when you're talking about, I think I use patterns a lot, like of patterns of behavior, patterns of thoughts, right? Patterns of like our body's just reactions that happen completely outside of our control. So what we're talking about is really looking at those patterns a lot deeper, and they're really, ingrained. They're really grooved in at that point, right? That's not going to be an overnight fix to change how those patterns work. So yeah, it's not a quick fix.
Yeah. Yeah. And it can require learning a lot about yourself, a lot about some situations that you may have not thought about for a lot of the time. And,
Right.
It can often be hard, but
Right.
rewarding, and, ultimately allows you to move forward,
Yes.
and allows you to, that's, I feel like, the only way that sometimes you can move forward. Because it can oftentimes just linger in your life for a long time, and in ways that you don't even know. So.
Right. And well, and a lot of times stuff starts out as like helpful, right? Or adaptive, at least, let's say. Maybe not helpful, but like it's a way to get through something. It was functional at some point, but now it's not. And so you're talking about having to look at things, to have new insight, to relearn something that now is no longer helpful for you. Right.
That's really hard because it speaks to the work of therapy.
Yeah,
it's
not work,
just it's not just. I mean, I think sometimes people don't understand that. It's like talking through hard situations is work.
It is,
and it's really. It can oftentimes be painful. It can oftentimes require. Hard conversations with a provider, and saying, admitting some things that you have made mistakes on, things that have been done to you. Man, that's really hard.
Yeah, like, and that's, I think that's the front end, right? Of having those really hard conversations is tough, and then it's like, as you move forward, through change, like sometimes that can be really hard too, right? Especially if how you've been kind of interacting in this world or coping with things. Now you're having to change something. Like, not only is that difficult, but like that can affect relationships that are around you. And so I think that's another misconception too, of like wanting it to feel better right away. And it's like, it may feel a little worse before it feels better. And you may have to change, it may affect some of your relationships in ways that you weren't expecting it to. So
that's true.
Yeah.
Well, I also wanted to ask you about some of the stuff about you. Okay. So I wanted to ask, what is maybe your favorite self-care practice? What does Kathryn do to take care of herself? Maybe it's a walk, maybe it's a certain thing you like to do. So what are some of your favorite self-care, and or some recommendations of self-care practices for people?
I mean, it's hard to pick just one, because I think I have different self-care for like different things. So that goes into like one thing I do, I guess, as part of my self-care is check in with myself about like, what do I need like right now, right? And so asking that question of myself is really important. So sometimes I think probably one of my favorite is like, we'll do family dance parties in the kitchen at the end of the day.
Okay,
like,
a small one, but a meaningful one.
Very meaningful. Like turn on the music really loud and just kind of let out and dance out the stress of the day, right? I do. I like a lot of movement, right? So I run. I like being outside and hiking. That's definitely a big part of my self-care.
Cool.
But even little things, I tell people it doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be, exercise. While it's wonderful for self-care, little things that you do, like when I leave here at the end of the day, shutting, the door to my office and really just kind of visualizing closing that up and like switching into home mode and outside of work mode. That's small thing, but it's really impactful to my self-care.
Okay, so visualizing that I've closed the book, I've closed the door.
Right.
I'm moving into a different space of my life, which is home.
Yes.
That's
absolutely.
That's that can be powerful for the rest of your night, to be able to just enjoy it, to leave.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's a big
I never
one.
thought about that way.
Yeah. Yeah. It was one that I learned like early on in my career of counseling.
Yeah.
Because especially working with interpersonal violence, like it was very, very heavy, every session. So having something like that to help transition was very important too.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
That could be helpful for some people, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, even everybody has work stress, right? It's not just counselors. So I think a lot of people struggle with that balance, or like coming home and venting. And while that can be helpful, sometimes that can just put us into a really, bad mood. And so maybe we do need to like have a point in our drive home where we just kind of shut it off and make that mental transition.
A conscious effort.
Yeah, conscious effort.
I'm done with thinking
Right.
about that for now.
Right.
I'll come back to it.
Yes. Yeah.
And as well, I don't want to go back to the pandemic too much, but man, that was hard to do.
Yes. Yeah. Especially when you're like walking out of one room in your house and right into home. Yeah.
That's really really a difficult thing.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you about some recommendations
Sure.
of things that have been impactful for you, or maybe can be helpful for have been helpful for some of your clients.
Yeah.
So what are maybe some of your favorite things to recommend? Maybe it's a podcast, a book, or a video, anything that you would recommend for people who have dealt with trauma or dealt with anything that they're going through.
Yeah. The Body Keeps the Score is a book by Bessel van der Kolk.
Okay.
It was life-changing for me, but I think it's been that way for a lot of my clients that have read it as well.
Okay.
Great book about stress and trauma and like what it does to the body.
Okay.
And then ways to kind of help heal from it.
Okay.
Counseling's one of those, but there's a lot of other ways
Okay.
too that he talks about. It's a great book. I also love anything by Kristen Neff. She does a lot of work on self-compassion, which I think is a huge part of mental health.
Yep.
She has a really great website with just little exercises that you can do to build self-compassion. And she's written, some good books and good workbooks if you want to dive deeper.
Okay. Any podcasts? Are you a podcast listener?
Yeah, I love podcasts. So,
Okay.
I mean, it's hard to pick just one or two.
Yep.
I think Hidden Brain is a really great one
Okay.
that I nerd out to a lot. I think there's Therapist Uncensored is another one that kind of talks about different topics related to mental health. The Happiness Lab, that's another really good one.
Okay,
too.
cool.
Yeah.
Well, that's good to hear. I know that some of those can be very helpful for people.
Yeah.
And then I want to ask you some fun questions,
Sure.
just things that are all about Kathryn and what you would do.
Yeah.
So first, what occupation other than being a counselor or being in the mental health space would you like to do?
So I guess kind of related would be like research or teaching.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Like doing research on this kind of stuff. But on like just kind of like a fun dream career, like food or travel blogger.
Okay.
So I love food and I love to travel. And so that would be ideal to do that for a living.
Yes. Oh, and what better time to do it than now? I feel like it's just being able to, you can make a career off of that now.
Yeah, I guess you could, right? An influencer.
Yeah, an influencer. I can see it happening.
I need to up my social media first.
Yes. You'll get there. Okay. Speaking to food, what would your last meal be?
Yeah, when you sent me this question, I'm like, it's hard to pick just one.
Okay.
But I think it would have to be, so my husband makes this like caprese French toast. It's sort of like bruschetta, but a much better spin on it.
I think I've heard you mention this
You
once.
probably have, because it's one of my favorite meals.
Okay, so that's got to go in there.
That's got to be the last meal.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then what are you drinking? Are you a wine person? Are you a soda person? What are you having to drink?
Like red wine or coffee. Both are like equally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Red wine or coffee, and then
yeah.
what's for dessert?
Tiramisu.
Okay.
100%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so caprese French toast
Right.
with tiramisu.
Yeah, see, I'd have the coffee with my tiramisu.
Yes,
Wine with
and
my
the wine.
caprese.
Okay,
Yeah.
that sounds like a great last meal, if you ask me.
Yes. Yeah.
Lots of culture in there.
Yeah, lots of culture in there. Yeah.
Okay, if you were an ice cream flavor, what would you be?
Probably Rocky Road, like real good, chocolatey, sweet, but with a little crunch in there.
Yeah, you got the
sometimes.
chunks
Yeah.
and the, okay.
Yeah.
rocky road. And what are some of your favorite movies or TV shows? What are you watching lately, and what's some of your maybe all-time favorites?
Yeah, so all-time favorite is The Office. I
Okay.
love The Office. Yeah, just a good comedy. Like I do like really off-the-wall comedies.
Yep.
And then the other thing is just like crime or action shows. So I actually just got done watching Jack Ryan series. Pretty
Gotcha.
good.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, yeah,
Awesome. Right. Well, thank you so much.
yeah.
I
Thank
appreciate you
you.
being here. If someone wants to get in therapy with you, I know all of our office is very busy, and we do have
Sure.
wait lists and stuff. But if somebody would like to, they can just call the front desk
Yep, they
and
can call
talk
the
with
front
the
desk.
receptionist, and they can help get in touch with how they can get a session with you, maybe for their kids or something like that.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah,
cool.
they can always call the front desk and like I said, kind of ask questions,
Yep.
come to find out,
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Well, thank you again. I appreciate your
Yeah.
time.
Thank you for having me. It was fun.
Yes, definitely. All right.
All right.
We are done. Thank you so much. That was really